So with that, we'd like to thank Temple Beth-El, which is the location that we're in this evening. And with that, we are going to have the Temple Beth-El Chair of the Social Action Committee, Laura Katzin, to speak. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening. As Chair of the Social Action Committee, I'd like to welcome you all. We're delighted to provide a venue for this important discussion with U.S. Attorney Sellinger, and we thank him and his team for their collaboration. And I'd also like to thank the Jersey City Police Department for providing security for this event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again. This is a lovely space. Next, I would like to bring one of our community liaisons and partners, Reverend Brittany Castine of the Mount Pisgah AME Church here in Jersey City.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Reverend Brittany Castine, and I am the pastor of Mount Pisgah AME Church here in Jersey City. And before coming into this area about 18 months ago, did a lot of work and lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, where we were able to work on many issues related to public health, public safety, and education reform issues. Just a few months ago, I think about maybe about 10 or so other preachers from areas in New Jersey met in Newark with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and where I believe that this initiative, this particular initiative, a series of towns hall were birthed. And I just want to applaud you and your staff for making the time to do this and elevating the importance of community engagement and that level of advocacy. And so it's my hope that for all of us who gather tonight, that we've come with any concerns or questions that we may have that may be particular entrance within the jurisdiction of the United States Attorney's Office, and that this would not only be the last conversation that we would have, but together we would work towards a solution to make sure that we all feel safe and secure in our neighborhoods. Because we do know that when it comes to safety, perception is reality, right? So thanks again for inviting me here, and I look forward to enjoying the conversation. I'm so grateful also to have a number of members of our congregation who have come out tonight to share in this discussion as well. Good evening.
Just want to make sure it's on. So again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come out this evening. We appreciate your presence here tonight. My name is Nishina Porter-Poznansky, and I'm the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Community Outreach Coordinator. As the Community Outreach Coordinator, I have the privilege of being the liaison and voice for community concerns. My information is on the community outreach brochures that you receive in your folders, so feel free to reach out to me with any community concerns. It is an honor to serve in this position under an administration that understands the importance of community engagement. Now, I would like to introduce you to the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Phillip Sellinger. Phillip was nominated to the post by President Biden. He was confirmed by the Senate and took office 15 months ago in December 2021. He has practiced law in New Jersey for over 40 years. Phillip has served on several boards, including the American Jewish Committee, New Jersey Leap, which empowers inner-city youth, and was the founder and co-chair of the New Jersey Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, which builds bonds between different faith communities. U.S. Attorney Sellinger is committed to civil rights, as evidenced by his creation of the Civil Rights Division. He is also committed to combating violent crime, and given his commitment to protect the community, he is here with all of you this evening. So with that, I am pleased to introduce you to the U.S. Attorney Phillip.
Thank you, Nashina. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Pastor Castan. And thank all of you for joining us here tonight. The mission of the United States Attorney's Office is to enforce federal law on behalf of all the citizens of New Jersey. And that means that we're your United States Attorney's Office. We are here to represent you. So our goal tonight is to explain a little bit about how the U.S. Attorney's Office works, hear from you as to any questions or comments, and hopefully that will allow us to represent you better as we go forward. Let me start with the creation of the of the Department of Justice. The United States Attorney's Office is part of the United States Department of Justice. The Department of Justice was created in the 1880s, in the wake of the Civil War, after Reconstruction, when the Ku Klux Klan was terrorizing the South. KKK members were intimidating black voters from voting, they were murdering black residents, and they were lynching them. So the department's foundation was to bring thousands of cases prosecuting KKK members during that period in the late 1880s and the few years thereafter. And that work on behalf of civil rights has continued to date. Fast forward to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I'm old enough to remember. I'm not sure if anyone else here is, but there are probably a few people who remember during the 1960s when officers of universities in the South, government officials, blocked universities, not allowing black students to enter or attend. And the Department of Justice forced those universities to allow black students in. And Department of Justice officials walked with those students to the doors of those universities, forcing their entry. I was privileged just a few weeks ago to go to Selma, Alabama, along with President Biden and leaders of the Department of Justice. And we marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And you all know what happened on Bloody Sunday when civil rights protesters were assaulted and beaten. So we were there to honor the heroes of the civil rights movement. Now, America has made great strides along the years and since then, but we understand the work is not complete. There are far too many instances today of discrimination and hate and unequal treatment under the law. And that's why one of the first things I did when I became United States Attorney was to create a civil rights division, which brings together criminal and civil prosecutors whose sole function the Civil Rights Division brings together criminal and civil prosecutors whose sole function is to protect the civil rights of those in our community. And many of them are with us tonight. You're going to hear from them. And they are dedicated to ensuring that civil rights are protected. their sole function is to protect the civil rights of all the citizens of New Jersey, no matter what they look like, where they're from, who they love, or how they worship. Let's talk for a moment about hate crime. Sadly, we have witnessed far too many instances over the years of hateful, violence-filled attacks which have taken lives. Right here in Jersey City, just 3 years ago. Buffalo, Charlottesville, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, another nightclub more recently in Colorado Springs, Menlo Park in California just recently. And these are all instances which are consistent with what the FBI reports and the state reports, which is that hate crime is increasing. The FBI has determined that the greatest threat to the safety of Americans today is that posed by violent, domestic, ultranationalist extremists. And if you look, just to share some of the recent statistics, these are New Jersey statistics through 2022. Over 2,000 incidents of hate crimes, bias incidents in New Jersey. Now, these are reported instances, so naturally we know that the number of offenses are far greater than the number of reported offenses. But in terms of the distribution of those offenses, which have gone up in almost every category. Attacks against Asian Pacific Islanders, 4% of the total. Hispanic Latino, 5%. LGBTQ, 16%. Jewish, 17%. And Black, 38%. So as we stand here tonight, I am here to give you my commitment as the U.S. Attorney that we are redoubling our efforts and have done so in order to protect the civil rights of those in our communities, including and especially those who are targeted most often. Black Americans, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, Jewish Americans, LGBTQ Americans. And standing up to hate is one of our most important missions. It's a critical priority for us. And we have no greater priority than making sure that the people of New Jersey are protected against these acts. And we will not hesitate to charge when offenses are committed. We demonstrated that just a few weeks ago when we charged a defendant for allegedly throwing a Molotov cocktail at a synagogue in Bloomfield. Just last year, when we charged a defendant who was alleged to have attacked visibly identifiable members of the Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, and also in connection with threats, where we charged the defendant who was alleged to have published a manifesto threatening to blow up synagogues in New Jersey. And we will not hesitate to bring these charges when the cases are presented to us. Let me turn for a moment to violent crime. Violent crime is an ever-increasing threat in New Jersey. Gun violence and related crimes, the plague of fentanyl and other opioids. Here, too, we are absolutely committed to ensuring that the people of New Jersey are safe, and we will spare no resources in our effort to protect them. Now, the statistics show that in Jersey City, and in New Jersey as a state as well, our incidents of violent crime, our shooting incidents, have gone down. They've gone down. This year, they've gone down over the last several years. We're grateful for those hard-earned reductions in violent crime, but we are very clear-eyed about the threat we face. And every senseless killing and act of violence is tragic, and we're committed to devote whatever resources are necessary in order to combat that. And you saw the results of this here in Jersey City just last week, where we charged 10 gang members who operated out of the Marion Court housing complex here in Jersey City, and we charged them with, according to the complaint, the indictment, 3 acts of murder, hundreds of acts of narcotics trafficking, robbery, guns, and the like. And that effort is part of our violent crime initiative, where we bring federal, state, and local partners together to fight against the drivers of violent crime, guns, and drug trafficking. So that effort was the result of work by my office, as well as the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office, under the supervision of Prosecutor Suarez, in the Jersey City Police Department, under the direction of Director Shea. Is Director Shea here? Because I want to thank him publicly for the support that he and his team gave to us in bringing that takedown to conclusion just last week. The ATF and the Newark Police were also involved in that initiative. Let me speak briefly about policing. When we think about policing, it implicates two priorities of our office: keeping the community safe and protecting civil rights. If the community is overrun by violence, then no one can feel safe. But if the community is threatened by those who wear the badge, people who are committed, who are obligated to protect us, then that's destructive, equally destructive as well. So regarding police misconduct, we work regularly with police officers who show tremendous dedication and hard work to keep the public safe. And we understand that they work under difficult circumstances, which are very stressful, and where oftentimes they're making split-second decisions. But at the same time, we're charged with enforcing the constitutional rights of the citizens of New Jersey. And that means that when police officers abuse the trust that has been placed in them by the community that they're obligated to serve, then we're required to act, and we do. So over the last several years, we brought a number of cases involving officers of the Patterson Police Department. A squad, a rogue squad, was called the Robbery Squad, and they stopped Patterson citizens, stole from them, sometimes using excessive force. Our case investigation resulted in the conviction of 8 of those officers, including the sergeant who masterminded the scheme. And you've all seen the role of the Department of Justice in the George Floyd prosecution, Ahmaud Arbery prosecution, and the Department of Justice is currently involved investigating the Tyree Nichols case. So the department, the U.S. Attorney's Office, does not hesitate to act in the appropriate cases. I should say not all cases can be prosecuted, but I will tell you that we look at these cases very, very seriously, and we're laser focused on them and our obligation to ensure that policing is constitutional. And in cases where a prosecution cannot be brought, It may be because there is no federal offense. Not every shooting is a result of a federal offense. It may be that an offense is not able to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But we look at all of these cases seriously, and if a charge is not brought, doesn't mean that the prosecutors are condoning particular behavior or blessing it. It's simply a failure of either a federal offense or proofs, in which case we look at other alternatives, one being a pattern or practice investigation, which is not for every case. It's reserved for systematic problems where departments are incapable of constitutional policing. And that's what happened in Newark a number of years ago. My office made findings that the Newark Police Department was involved in systematic unconstitutional stops, searches, arrests disproportionately of black people, sometimes using excessive force. And we entered into a consent decree under court supervision where Newark was required essentially to transform itself. Body-worn cameras required, de-escalation training required, and a prohibition against retaliatory policing. And the heart of the consent decree with Newark is community policing, the essence of which is that trust and mutual respect between law enforcement and the community is critical to effective law enforcement. And we believe that as a result of this consent decree, that Newark has made very substantial progress in terms of addressing its issues. Let me very briefly turn to corporate crime. Corporate crime threatens our markets. It decimates people's pocketbooks. It undermines trust of the public in our public officials. So we do not hesitate to investigate and prosecute fraudsters, those who try to corrupt our financial markets or our healthcare systems, those who commit cyber attacks on our networks, and public officials who violate the public trust. And our primary focus is on prosecuting the individuals who were responsible for committing the crime and not just the corporations. Under my watch, no corporate executive is going to avoid a criminal prosecution by having their company pay a fine. Let me end on two brief topics. One is the way we approach our cases. Our job as prosecutors in the federal government is not just to secure convictions, not to win cases, not to lock people up and throw away the key. Our job, our charge, is to secure justice, which means doing the right thing the right way for the right reasons. And what that means is for every individual case, the prosecutors in my office are charged to look at the individual circumstances of the defendant, the offense that was committed, and the personal history of the defendant. There are cases where substantial jail sentences are necessary in order to deter crime. But there are also cases where a substantial jail sentence, or perhaps even no sentence at all, may be appropriate. And my office is committed to programs in our court that ease the reentry of incarcerated felons after jail, after their incarceration, to help them re-enter society successfully so they can become productive members of society. The last point, briefly, I want to explain, just as a point of reference, the difference between the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State Attorney General's Office, and the local prosecutors. Our authority is limited to federal jurisdiction, which in most cases involves people, conduct, goods, which affect multiple states, which cross state lines, or constitutional violations. So if you've got a gun running case where guns are imported from North Carolina or Pennsylvania to Jersey City, that's a federal offense. Most narcotics offenses, federal offense, because of crossing state lines and an effect on commerce. If you have in Jersey City a simple assault of one individual attacking another individual where there's no animus of any protected groups, that is not within federal jurisdiction. And then you've got constitutional violations. So we've talked about unconstitutional policing. If there's discrimination in housing, in lending, in employment, areas like that, that too is federal jurisdiction. But let me tell you what's not federal jurisdiction. Number one, operational policing issues, where police are posted. That's not within our jurisdiction. And the other thing that's not in our jurisdiction, which I know is very important to many people in Jersey City, are issues relating to housing prices and absentee landlords and housing insecurity. We understand these issues are quite important to the residents of this town, but unless there are constitutional issues which involve discrimination, then that typically would not be, or a federal program violation of some kind, then that typically would not be part of our authority. So with that said, I'm going to pass this on and ask Linda Ortiz from the Community Relations Service to tell you how we're going to handle the rest of the evening.
Thank you, U.S. Attorney Selinger. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. Hi, my name is Linda Ortiz from the U.S. Department of Justice, Community Relations Service, and this is my colleague, Matthew Latimer. And for this evening, in our short time together, we're also known as your facilitators for the evening. And so, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have cell phones, please silence them. We get a lot of feedback in the temple, and so please take the time to silence your phones now. In addition to how we're going to run the night this evening, as you see behind you all, there are boards. There are writing materials, these Post-its. I've spoken to most of you tonight, and so has Matthew. And so we are setting up some questions for this evening. You might have more questions after you hear our wonderful prosecutors, subject matter experts speak. And so please, we have lots of these. Matthew and I will be coming around. All you have to do is put it up, and we'll take them from you and post it. So when we are ready for our Q&A, we have we will be able to ask your questions. And we're doing it because we have such a short time today that we want to make sure that we answer your questions. In addition to, lastly, there is I know you all signed in. There's a second sign-in sheet, and it is right behind this, right in front of the whiteboards. There, if you want follow-up, meaning the office will reach out to you concerning whatever topic it is that you write on the paper, on the sign-in sheet, please do so. It'll be there when the program ends as well. So if you haven't had an opportunity to do so, you will have the opportunity at the end of the program.
Sure. So what we're going to be doing, as Linda mentioned, to make sure that we're making the most out of the time this evening, is getting those questions written down. We'll be circulating, collecting them from you, and also just checking the boards. So if you don't see one of us, or you can't, we're on the other side of the room, you can just go ahead and just post it on the boards there. In terms of just general housekeeping, if anyone needs facilities, they are to my left and to your right through the classroom there. And other than that, I believe after we've gone through all the questions that are here, we may have some additional time, and we'll make use of that time for folks who want to express additional comments or thoughts.
Enjoy the rest of the night. You guys are in for a treat. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening again. And so with that, we're going to go into our subject matter areas. The first one is going to be environmental justice, and I'm going to ask Assistant U.S. Attorney Alex Szilagyi to come up. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Alex Szilagyi. I'm an Assistant United States Attorney here at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I'm also the Environmental Justice Coordinator here in the district. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the environmental work that we do in our office, and also about some really interesting initiatives that we've started, and critically, some of the ways that we rely on you as members of the community to reach out to us and have a dialogue with us to make sure that we do the best job at protecting the environmental rights of the people of New Jersey. So the first thing is, what environmental laws do we have the power to enforce? You've heard U.S. Attorney Selinger talk about jurisdiction, and when we think about that in the environmental space, we think principally about laws that we hear in the news a fair amount. These are laws like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. But there's also laws that we maybe don't hear about quite so much, but are still equally important. Laws like the Safe Drinking Water Act, or laws like the Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act. As you can imagine, there are a lot of laws that deal with these environmental issues at the federal level. But they all have one main point. It's to protect the health and safety of the communities that we live in, and to enforce and uphold laws that stop people and corporations from illegally dumping in our waters, polluting our air, and even in contexts that we don't think about quite so much, like selling or leasing property where the person knows there's lead paint in the facility. And as we know, that can have a tremendous impact on children and people in the household. That's the main point of the laws we enforce. Now, typically how it works is we work with these really incredible partner agencies who have amazing experience and competence in these areas. These are agencies like the EPA, or even the Housing and Urban Development, and they let us know about violations that they're aware of, and we have the ability in our office, principally through the environmental justice team, to seek, where appropriate, criminal enforcement of those laws or civil enforcement, fines and orders from judges to stop the polluters from doing what they're doing. That's the way it traditionally works. But here's where it gets really interesting and where things have changed recently. Within the past year or so, U.S. Attorney Selinger has acted on a mandate from President Biden to build out not just the environmental practice, but to do environmental justice. Within our district, that really has two steps of what we've done. The first is, by creating the environmental justice team, we've put together a team of assistant U.S. attorneys like myself who live in these communities. When there is pollution in the Passaic River, that's our river. My mom works right next to it. When there's pollution next to a factory in Linden, these are our cities, our towns. We live in them. We have a focus on environmental issues from a local level. And no case is too big, but more importantly, no case is too small for us. The second part of that is where the justice component comes in. We know that communities in certain parts of New Jersey have historically felt the brunt of these environmental violations. There's more pollution there. There was less enforcement of these laws in those communities. That's changing. Our team is not only focused on enforcing these laws, but doing so with an emphasis on violators who are impacting those communities that have historically taken the brunt of these environmental harms. And this is where the community involvement comes into play in a new and really interesting way. In order for the environmental justice team to do its work at its fullest potential, we require a dialogue from the community. There's nobody who knows better about what's going on involving the health and safety and environment of a community than the people who live in it. To that end, we've set up a number of different ways for people to reach out to us directly and let us know any complaints, concerns, questions, you name it. If you have anything that has to do with environmental issues, we've set up public-facing ways for you to reach us. The main way is through our website on the U.S. Attorney's Office, justice.gov website, which I'll provide to you in a minute, and I wrote down so I don't forget it. But on the website, there's also not only an explanation of what we do, but how you can reach out to us by email, a committed email solely for environmental issues, questions, complaints, a telephone line that's dedicated solely to those issues, a complaint form that you can fill out that will automatically email to all the folks at the U.S. Attorney's Office who have concerns about this, even ways that you can get access to the state level environmental folks. The point is that we urge you to reach out to us. Just like no case is too big or too small, no issue is too big or too small. If we can handle it, we will. If not, we will get you in touch with the people who we think are best suited to deal with those issues. But that dialogue, that emphasis, is all part of this initiative in the environmental justice team. Let me give you the website just once, and it's also written on the pamphlets, but it's justice.gov/USAO-NJ. One more time, that's justice.gov/USAO-NJ. And the environmental justice page is on there. So in sum, we are operating in this space. We're excited, we're committed, and again, we do urge you to reach out to us. But thank you, very, very much for giving me a few minutes to talk to you, and I look forward to hearing from you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And now I will turn it over to Michael Campion, who is the Chief of the Civil Rights Division. Thank you.
Thanks, Nashina. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Campion, and I'm the Chief of our Civil Rights Division. We're grateful that you took the time to meet with us tonight. So we're going to try to do a little bit of a panel discussion with the Civil Rights Division. As U.S. Attorney Selinger noted, the Justice Department was created to protect civil rights. But as he noted, that work is not complete. And U.S. Attorney Selinger created our Civil Rights Division to help complete that work. And several members are here today, and I'm proud to introduce them. We have Senior Civil Rights Counsel Joe Gripko and Assistant U.S. Attorneys Junice Baldwin, Susan Malenke, and Tandy Boylan. I can tell you I'm very lucky to work every day with them. So we want to talk about some of the statutes we enforce and some of our primary initiatives at this time. As the U.S. Attorney noted, every American deserves constitutional policing. No one is above the law, including law enforcement officers. And so while we have tremendous respect for the substantial majority of law enforcement officers who work honorably every day, often in danger to themselves, when law enforcement officers violate the civil rights and constitutional rights of others, we will hold them accountable. Joe Gripko is a federal prosecutor in office who works a great deal on these matters. So I'm going to pass it to Joe to speak a little bit about the statutes that we work on, and then we'll pass it back to me, and we'll talk a little bit about the civil enforcement.
Both hate crimes and
Color of law.
okay. So there is one primary statute that we enforce for what we call color of law violations, and what that means is that if any law enforcement officer, you tend to think of police officers, but anyone, judges, prosecutors, even school teachers, violates someone's civil rights, that is any constitutional civil rights, they can be held liable under federal law. The general one that many people think of is when a police officer uses excessive force that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment right to be free from unlawful seizures. But in addition to that, there's a number of other violations, essentially any constitutional violation, a violation of the First Amendment, your right to free speech, a violation of the First Amendment, your right to record officers as they go about their job, or anyone to go about their job, a violation of the Fourth Amendment in stopping you improperly without cause to do so, a violation of the Fourth Amendment of stealing property from a citizen. Those are all covered by the statute. So essentially, any law enforcement officer who violates any person's constitutional rights can be prosecuted by our office.
Thanks, Joe. And so these cases, Joe brings prosecutions mostly focused on individual incidents. But we have another tool, as the U.S. Attorney was noting, when there's really systemic issues within a department or a law enforcement agency. The Justice Department can open what's known as a pattern of practice investigation, and where we identify systemic constitutional civil rights violations, we can obtain significant reform, often through a consent decree. The U.S. Attorney noted the great work of our office in bringing about the Newark consent decree over the Newark Police Department, and members of our division are working on overseeing that, and it's bringing meaningful reform. And one thing to note, constitutional policing doesn't mean bad policing. Constitutional policing is good policing, and some of the strongest evidence of that is that crime has decreased since the implementation of the consent decree. Another area where we bring pattern or practice investigations of law enforcement agencies involves prisons and jails, where there is systemic issues within a prison or jail that violates inmates' constitutional rights. We can open a pattern practice investigation and bring about, in appropriate cases, a consent decree. We did this just a short time ago with respect to the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. There we identified systemic cultural issues where the prison was unable to stop staff sex assaults of female inmates. They are now operating under a consent decree. And while I'm on this topic, I just want to give a special acknowledgement to Rick Robinson of the NAACP, who really is evidence of community partnership with our office, and he has been a leader in bringing attention to this issue. So thank you, Rick. So another topic we want to talk about that the U.S. Attorney mentioned is combating hate. And we do this really three ways. One way is through criminal enforcement, and I'm going to pass it to Joe again to describe sort of the primary statutes we enforce to combat hate crimes.
So there are a number of federal hate crime statutes. They cover whenever someone, because of someone's protected characteristics, generally race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, whenever someone acts upon those things and commits an act of violence or threatens an act of violence, those are prosecuted federally under the federal hate crime statutes. In addition to those, we also prosecute people who commit acts of arson or other property crimes against churches and religious institutions. Those are the other sort of hate crimes that we prosecute.
Thanks, Joe. And this work is important, but we can't always prosecute our way out of hate. So to tackle the problem, one thing that our office did under U.S. Attorney Sellinger's leadership was we launched a Justice Department initiative called United Against Hate. We did this about a year ago, and through this initiative, we're meeting with communities across the state to engage with communities, to speak with communities about identifying, reporting, and preventing hate crimes and hate incidents. And I'll use this as a pitch. We're happy to meet with your organizations, with your communities. We do it nights and weekends, and members of our division are happy to meet with you. So please feel free to reach out to us. And importantly, this initiative doesn't focus only on hate crimes, it focuses on civil hate incidents. Because alongside hate crimes, there's also discrimination. So that brings us to our civil enforcement of the federal civil rights laws, which U.S. Attorney Sellinger earlier mentioned. We enforce several federal civil rights statutes to confront and stop discrimination, often incidents that don't reach the level of a crime. These statutes give us the ability in many areas to combat discrimination: housing, lending, public accommodations, employment, voting. It allows us to open investigations and file lawsuits. And the categories that we can protect and fight against discrimination involve discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex. And this is especially important, as U.S. Attorney Sellinger noted earlier, given the significant rise in anti-Black, anti-Jewish, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-Muslim, and anti-Asian acts of hate that we're seeing throughout our state and throughout our country. One thing that is a focus of our office and the focus of the Department of Justice is to focus on systemic issues of discrimination. And one area is redlining. Now, this is the practice of a bank refusing to offer certain neighborhoods equal access to credit opportunities because of the race of those who live there. Now, some of you may think, well, isn't that a vestige of what happened, 50, 60, 70 years ago? Well, it's not a vestige. It did happen then, but it's continuing to happen today. And the statistics bear that out, and it creates great wealth disparities in this country that can be directly traced to redlining. So before joining the U.S. Attorney's Office, Assistant U.S. Attorney Junice Baldwin worked as a trial attorney at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. There, among other things, he worked on redlining investigations. And he continues to work on those types of cases here at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Junice, can you tell us a little bit about the Combating Redlining Initiative?
Sure. So we pursue redlining claims under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Just a little bit of history. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed right after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So it's a very important statute, and it was one that Dr. King was very focused on before his assassination. In October of 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice announced the Combating Redlining Initiative to protect majority minority areas from redlining. It is a high priority for the U.S. Department of Justice. It's a high priority for the U.S. Attorney's Office here. And we work in partnership with the folks down in D.C. at the U.S. Department of Justice in bringing these cases. We believe that having a home is the key to financial wealth and also stability, and so no one should be denied the ability to pursue home ownership because of their race or because of where they live. We take these cases very seriously. We prosecute these cases, and most of the cases end up in settlements, and these settlements are transformative. In our redlining settlements, we typically get injunctive relief, which stops the bank from engaging in a discriminatory practice. The second thing that we get is we get money for credit education and financial literacy, with that money targeted to majority minority areas. The third thing that we typically get is money for marketing to those areas, because a lot of times folks in those areas don't know about the opportunities available to them. The fourth thing that we typically get is a loan subsidy fund. That's typically a vast amount of money. I can tell you from a settlement that I handled when I was with the U.S. Department of Justice, we got $1.4 million. There was a recently announced settlement just a few weeks ago for $9.6 million. That was part of the initiative. But that money goes to a loan subsidy fund that provides assistance for first-time home buyers in majority minority areas. And then the last thing that we do is we require banks to build branches and loan production offices in these areas. So not only is there more money in these areas for home ownership, but we bring jobs to these areas as well. And a lot of times the bank branches, they serve as sort of almost like a community anchor in which other types of development flow into the community. So this is great work. We take these cases very seriously. We just recently had a success in New Jersey, and we look forward to more. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonas. And one more point on redlining. I'm going to pass it off to Assistant U.S. Attorney Susan Malenke, who is one of the leaders on our team where we recently prosecuted a redlining case against Lakeland Bank, impacting the Newark area and around the Newark area.
Can everyone hear me? So I'll give one example of what Jonas was just talking about, which is last year we sued a bank called Lakeland Bank that operates across North Jersey and Central Jersey and largely in the Newark area. And we sued them for redlining. And our complaint alleged that since at least 2015, this bank had avoided lending to communities of color, and in particular, majority Black and majority Hispanic communities in the Newark area. And during that time, we allege that the bank continued to lend in majority white areas. So we resolved that case in the way that Jonas just explained, a consent decree. So a court order that requires the bank to change their behavior and gives us a way to ensure that they are. So through the settlement with Lakeland Bank, they were required to put $12 million in a loan subsidy fund. And that fund goes directly to people in those underserved communities. So qualified borrowers there have access to credit the same way they would if they were in a majority white neighborhood. And the amount of the subsidy fund is based on the gap in how much Lakeland was lending and how much its peers were lending in the same exact places. So we expect that to generate $120 million in credit for people in those communities. And that settlement requires Lakeland to do a few other things. They need to open 2 new branches to serve communities that they've been ignoring in the past, and one of those branches will be in Newark. And finally, they're required to devote money to advertising and outreach and financial literacy, like Jonas was talking about, to ensure that people in those communities that have been ignored for years by the bank have a way to be in conversation with the bank and have access to credit and home mortgages.
Thank you, Susan. And that settlement at the time it was entered into was the third largest redlining settlement in the Justice Department's history. So we're we're really proud of the impact that should have on the community. We're talking about systemic issues. Another systemic issue that we see is sexual harassment, and in particular, sexual harassment in housing. Under the Fair Housing Act, we can bring investigations and lawsuits where there is sexual harassment of women, including gay and bisexual individuals as well, any type of discrimination based on any of the protected categories. And I'd like to pass it again to Susan to talk very briefly about one of the cases that we recently resolved.
Sure. So in 2020, our office sued a landlord in Elizabeth, New Jersey named Joseph Santani, who at the time owned and rented out hundreds of apartments in that city. And our complaint alleged that he had sexually harassed tenants and prospective tenants of his apartment for at least 15 years. And specifically that he requested or demanded sexual favors in order to rent people apartments. And he demanded sexual favors from tenants who were short on rent. And if they didn't comply, he evicted them. So all of this is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Mr. Santani's victims were women and men who identified as gay or bisexual, and we ultimately identified 57 victims. We resolved this case with another consent decree that required Mr. Santani to put $4 million into a fund that would compensate his victims. And finally, Mr. Santani is no longer a landlord. Under the court order, he was required.
So, yeah, thank you, Susan. And this led to the largest sexual harassment in housing settlement in the Justice Department's history. We're about to wrap up. I just want to note our civil rights portion, that we also are involved in an initiative to combat sexual harassment in housing. We're meeting with community groups, civil rights groups, interfaith groups, social service agencies around the state to talk about sexual harassment in housing, because many people know it's wrong, but they don't know that we enforce it, we, the U.S. Attorney's Office, so we need to get the word out so people can report to us, so we can learn of cases like this, which in fact we learned through this type of outreach. And as Susan noted, that some of the victims here were LGBTQ plus individuals. This is also a priority for the department to protect the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals, and we look to have meetings with groups involving those issues as well. We're happy, the members of our division are going to be here. We're happy to speak with you when we're done and take questions later. So thank you very much for your time tonight. Appreciate it. So I mentioned my friend Rick Robinson before. Rick Robinson's at the NAACP. He works both in the Essex chapter, but as well as a leadership position in the state chapter. Rick Robinson does amazing work for the community. He's a friend of our office, and we are lucky in the state of New Jersey that he does the work that he does. So I'm going to introduce Rick. Rick, if you could say a few words, we'd appreciate it.
Conference NAACP for Criminal Justice, the North New Jersey NAACP for Criminal Justice, and the Civilian Complaint Review Board in North New Jersey. So I am on the phone with them all the time. You know why? Because they work for you. They work for you. Now, you heard all the different cases that they've been involved with. Santani case. This guy was raping girls, women, to get their rent paid. Edna Mahan prison. correction officers were raping women in prison. This is another matter. Police brutality. We don't get everything we want all the time when it comes to police brutality. First of all, I'm going to tell you straight up. I actually think police are awesome. And I have police in my family and in corrections. But they mentioned a little while ago that sometimes people get out of hand and they need to be prosecuted. This agency came out here, they came in Newark as well, because they want you to file complaints with their office. Where the hell did you ever see that at? Now, I'm talking about everybody. So as a chair for the NAACP, we hate discrimination. I don't care if you are white, black, Hispanic, Jewish, Indian, Asian, we hate it. And I hate it with a passion. Because I was a victim of police brutality when I was in college. It almost stopped me from going and getting my degree in college. You know how my parents felt back then? So again, utilize this agency. They have came out here to seek your opinions, your concerns, so they can serve you. Understand this, they work for you. They do. And you have never seen any law enforcement agency on this level, the federal level, come out and try to actually entertain your opinions and your concerns. So again, I want to give our thanks, NAACP, to the temple. I want to give our thanks to Peter Selinger and his team. And listen, you need to actually use them. You do. You really, really do. All right? Thank you.
Thank you again, Rick. And thank you again all for coming out. Now I'm going to turn it over to our criminal division, which will be Desiree Grace, who is the deputy chair of the criminal division and also in charge of the Jersey City Violent Crime Initiative, and Jamel Spencer as well. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jamel Semper. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division. I'm going to follow his lead and forego the mics. Thank you so much for having us. A lot of what we do is trying to serve you. That is our job. That is our number one function. Within the space that I work in, it is the violent crime area. Oftentimes when we're confronting with violent crime, gun trafficking, shootings, drug trafficking on a mass scale, a lot of that activity occurs in our most vulnerable communities. And we spend a lot of time working with a lot of talented and dedicated assistant United States attorneys who are focused on the problems that you have. A lot of our successes are born out of the collaborative work we do with our local partners, particularly the Jersey City Police Department, Newark Police Department, Madison Police Department. Many of the cases that we're going to talk about tonight are really, they start off within our local municipalities. And what we are able to do with these problems that people within the vulnerable community space is we're able to apply our federal resources to scale up these investigations to have impactful, meaningful prosecutions against the people who are driving the violence. We run the Violent Crime Initiative. Essentially what that is a program designed to focus on the most violent offenders who are responsible for a lot of the drug trafficking, a lot of the violence you see, and we target them to make the communities in which you live in safer. That is our number one priority. We love this job. We're very passionate about this work. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dennis Grace.
Thank you. As Jamel said, and as you've seen as the theme of all the speakers tonight, our job is to serve you. Our job is to serve the communities in the District of New Jersey. No matter what our specialty is, whether it's civil rights, environmental justice, violent crime, which Jamel and I are really passionate about, no matter what it is to serve the community. And we do that in a way that is largely intelligence driven. So you've heard Alex Lodge
part that is more interactive and collaborative, and we're going to turn it over to CRS to facilitate the questions. Linda and Matthew, thank you.
So we have a number of very thoughtful and very thorough questions. We're going to try to get through as many as we can, and we've actually categorized them by the different practice groups that are up here. So why don't we start with police misconduct, and this is from Lawrence Ham. Community organizations want to know if you will investigate the death of Najee Seabrooks in Patterson, and if the Justice Department will investigate the Patterson Police Department. And there's also a second question that's here that kind of flows in line with that. When dealing with cases of police misconduct, how do you determine that a pattern and practice investigation should be handled by the U.S. Attorney as opposed to the State Attorney General or County Prosecutor? How do you determine when a use of individual misconduct is prosecuted federally and not by the State Attorney General / county?
We are saddened, of course, by the death of Mr. Seabrooks in Patterson. We are limited in what we can say and can't comment on the particulars of that case or any other case. But I certainly can say that we take any matter involving allegations of police misconduct very seriously. And we're concerned about the safety and the citizens of Patterson, and we're also concerned to make sure that the violent crime efforts in Patterson that Mr. Semper and Ms. Gray spoke about are successfully combated. With respect to pattern and practice cases generally and the difference between federal and state each operate separately. They make their own determinations. As a practical matter, the state is required to investigate police shootings and present them to grand juries. So in the normal course, or oftentimes, the state may be the first to look at a matter. But our jurisdiction is independent, and we are laser focused on these issues, and in any matter where we are unsatisfied with the results of a particular investigation, or we believe that additional resources are needed to look at that, we will not hesitate to do it. And my charge to our Civil Rights Division is whatever resources are necessary to look at these cases should be devoted. As I did mention earlier, in order to have a federal criminal offense involving police misconduct, you've got to meet very specific requirements for federal offenses. And you've got to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. But our office spares no resources looking at these matters. As I said at the beginning, with respect to Mr. Seabrooks, or the question about a pattern and practice investigation as to Patterson in particular, I'm just not able to comment publicly at this time.
Thank you. So we had many questions regarding Jersey City Public Schools, and many questions, and so I've compiled them sort of all together. And so, discrimination in the workplace, unfair hiring practices. The Jersey City Public Schools are violating all of the EEO rights of employees. The district is not protecting the complainant. Investigations are unfairly conducted. Again, another one. Discrimination in the workplace, local government and public schools, failure to properly utilize federal funding for public school education, Title I funds not being distributed fairly. Another, employee discrimination in the Jersey City Public Schools need to be investigated. Who handles that? Who handles the corruption when it comes to a union not following bylaws as far as money is concerned? And this one was just a title, but it has to do with the failure to properly utilize federal funding for public schools. Again, another audience member highlighted violation of when parental involvement, that's access to, of parents to the school, and those opportunities not being available to them. And again, Title I funding.
Well, thanks for that. So I can answer some of these questions, or at least direct to where we could find answers to these questions. In terms of discrimination in public schools, in terms of discrimination of employees, someone can file a complaint with the EEOC. And the EEOC will then conduct an investigation. And once their investigation is complete, assuming they make a finding of discrimination, then it does get referred to the Justice Department to have a supplemental investigation and file a lawsuit. There's one caveat to that. If there is a pattern or practice of discrimination in the school, one can file a complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the U.S. Department of Justice for potential Title VII violations. So we have a civil rights hotline. It's in the materials. We have a complaint portal, as does the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, where one can file their complaint with, or call in your complaint, and then we can provide more specific information. As to discrimination with respect to students, our jurisdiction's a little different. That's not under Title VII. That would be under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And there, what we're looking at is discrimination, whether there was, if it was student-on-student discrimination, whether the school responded appropriately to address the discrimination. That's where our jurisdiction is. And so one can file a complaint with us or with the U.S. Justice Department Civil Rights Division, and that's how, and again, you could look into the portal. With the other issues, I think that falls outside our lane. I think some of that is the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. I urge you just contact us, call our Civil Rights Hotline, and we can try to point you in the right direction.
Thank you, Michael.
So we have a couple questions regarding law enforcement and also failures in policing. So does your office, first one is, does your office support the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign? This campaign advocates for law enforcement purchases of weapons not be made with gun manufacturers who are most lax in handling gun sales. So Bill, I think it's Bill Lilly, together with, this is actually the person's email address here. Do you have data to support your efforts on this issue? Okay, so that was the first one. Again, that's the, does your office support the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign regarding law enforcement purchases of weapons not made with gun manufacturers who are lax in handling gun sales? The second question that's here, the gross public failures are so frequent and widespread. Do you call into question the validity of police to change policing? Prosecution of the worst violations has highlighted problems, but is very limited to solve them. Widely publicized failures of policing have shown that the practice of policing diverges from what is formally trained, and there's ineffective oversight within police structures and by civilians to whom all public servants should be accountable. Prosecutors prosecute, agents investigate, officers arrest, but what is the Department of Justice doing to rethink and reorient these forces to engage in the broader work of more just national and less secretive and change-resistant justice system? What is your challenge to the wider community to help enable better mutual accountability? So let me read that again. Prosecutors prosecute, agents investigate, officers arrest, but what is the Department of Justice doing to rethink and reorient these forces to engage in the broader work of more just national and less secretive and change-resistant justice system? And what is your challenge to the wider community to help enable better mutual accountability?
So on the first issue, which is legislative, the government is divided into separate branches. So in the legislative sphere, we have no involvement. Our role, the U.S. Attorney's Office, is the enforcement of federal laws, existing federal laws, and representing government agencies as well. With respect to the question relative to reforming police departments, what pattern and practice investigations do, and if you look, for example, to our consent order with the city of Newark, is they result in reformation of a police department. So they require, as part of a court-mandated order in the context of Newark, de-escalation techniques, which is a reform to policing. Body-worn cameras, becoming much more common today, but not necessarily across the board, and prohibitions on retaliatory force. So the pattern and practice investigations result in substantial reforms to police departments. Beyond that, the leadership of the Department of Justice in Washington, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, etc., they are out speaking to national law enforcement agencies on a regular basis. And the Department of Justice funds, invests substantial funds in efforts that assist police to best address all of the challenges that are faced.
Thank you. If someone believes they are a victim of an Asian hate crime or any hate crime, is there a procedure to report it to federal authorities, to US DOJ? If yes, what is it?
First, if you're an immediate harm, you should call 911. We don't run out to do things, so that should be your first call. No, I'm not joking, you should. But after that, we have a hotline where you can call and leave a message. We also have a website where you can call, where you can write down your complaint, fill out a complaint form. I can assure you, I read every one of them personally, and I send them to the FBI agent in the jurisdiction who handles the various things, and we discuss the case and how we're able to go forward and whether or not it is something that we can go forward with. We take them all seriously. Every single one that comes in, we review and treat it as serious.
Thank you. Walgreens' decision to pull back on the abortion pill. Does DOJ have jurisdiction and can it do anything to ensure access? Walgreens' decision to pull back on the abortion pill. Does DOJ have jurisdiction and can it do anything to ensure access?
So I can't speak specifically to that issue. What I can say is that the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office is committed to protecting access to reproductive health care, including abortion services. They're committed. They've formed they've formed throughout the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice a group to focus on these issues. And what we focus on at the U.S. Attorney's Office is enforcement of the federal statutes that impact New Jersey. One of the statutes we enforce is the FACE Act, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. Two of our attorneys, Joe and Susan, recently prosecuted a FACE Act claim to where someone was blocking access to an abortion clinic in Bergen County. So what I can tell you is that other attorneys at the Department of Justice, under the leadership of Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, are focused on issues to protect access to reproductive health care. But beyond that, I can't speak about any specific issue.
Thank you. What type of circumstances of shootings are within the jurisdiction of the U.S. Attorney? High level or urban, this is environmental justice, so I'll hold off on the environmental justice. But the question is, what type of circumstances of shootings are in the jurisdiction of the U.S. Attorney's Office?
So the short answer is a lot of them. And the reason for that is we need to have some sort of federal nexus, but typically a lot of the shootings that we see are gang-related, drug-related. Those are shootings that we can prosecute. If they are tied to a criminal organization, whether that's the Bloods, the Crips, a neighborhood street gang, a drug trafficking organization, if that's something that we can show, if we can show that the shooting is related to that criminal organization, we can prosecute it.
Yes, and also within, if there's something that affects interstate commerce. So if you have what we call a Hobbs Act robbery, a commercial robbery where a gun was discharged, or a carjacking where a gun was discharged, that also might be a circumstance where we can get involved. So there is a lot of leeway, but as my colleague said, we do need what's called a federal nexus.
Now we have some housing questions. What do you plan to do to address landlord collusion, antitrust violations, consumer fraud, and rental price fixing? Will you join the current suits versus real page in the DOJ? And then there's a second question as a follow-up. What will you do to ensure the statutes and ordinances of New Jersey and Jersey City, respectively, are enforced?
And the third one is her question.
Okay.
Be clear.
Okay. To be clear, I am not asking about fair pricing, housing prices per se, but rather the interstate collusion between a company and corporate large landlords to defraud consumers. Will this be tackled in the tri-state area?
I can't answer directly. In terms of our civil rights enforcement, we enforce the Fair Housing Act. That prevents discrimination in housing. I think your question relates to areas outside of our civil rights enforcement authority, so I can't answer it. In terms of enforcing the statutes of New Jersey and Jersey City, we don't have authority to do that. We only have authority to enforce federal statutes. So I don't think I provided a satisfactory answer, but maybe we can help direct you to someone else. And if anyone has thoughts on the other issues raised in that question, I'm happy to pass it on.
What I would add is that issues involving fraud, antitrust violations was mentioned. All of that comes within federal jurisdiction. If there's allegations of corruption by public officials, fraud, that is within our jurisdiction. So we ask the community to advise us, file complaints with us if you're aware of that, and we will investigate all of those allegations very, very seriously, just as with all of the other areas that we've talked about tonight. If there are allegations of police misconduct, we ask the community to file reports, file complaints. And if you're witnessing an incident and you take a video, share that with us. The reason I created a civil rights division was to ensure that we were using every resource possible to protect the civil rights of the folks within New Jersey, and that's why we take all of these allegations about individual officers or police departments as a whole, or government corruption or fraud or antitrust violations very seriously.
We had just a couple more questions here. What are you doing to help/address individuals dealing with opioid abuse in the community? What type of rehabilitation is offered, and what is being done to address public safety issues they present?
So on the opioids front, if we have two kinds of problem-solving courts, we call them, at the U.S. Attorney's Office. One is to address people whose criminal conduct seems to be driven mostly by drug addiction. And when we see signs of that, we divert them into a separate program, which is treatment-driven. And as long as they engage in treatment and other services, and it's a lengthy process. Obviously those problems are not solved really quickly, but as long as they stay engaged in that process, it's really likely that they'll end up with a much lower or no sentence and a sentence to supervised release, and they're basically part of that program as long as they need it. On the reentry front, we've had a program for 10 years now where we work with people who are coming out of prison who are at really high risk of returning, and we provide them individualized services. So we meet with them twice a month, and we also provide them with social workers who meet with them once a week. And we just go through sort of every single need they have, and if it's housing or for mental health services or for lawyers to handle financial issues that they have or reunite with their families. And it usually lasts a year and a half, and at the end of it we see a shift for people who are coming out, from people who are really struggling just to survive to people who have a real middle-class existence, who are able to buy homes who have long-standing, well-paying jobs. So it's a high priority of ours, but it takes a lot of work. And if you're an organization that is interested in supporting this kind of activity, we could really use a partnership with you. And if you know someone who needs these kind of services, we really welcome you to reach out to us.
Thank you. Our marketing dollars, financial literacy programs, and other resources used in communities where aggressive speculators and investors practice blockbusting. I'll ask again. Our marketing dollars, financial literacy programs, and other resources in use in communities where aggressive speculators and investors practice blockbusting. Matthew, you want to expand on that one?
And if anybody wants to add to this, please feel free. But I believe what the question is, communities where there's aggressive speculation, is that they're marketing money that's actually being funneled to financial literacy programs, or is that not happening? Are those resources being neglected so that folks can be taking advantage of those different practices of aggressive speculation and blockbusting? Feel free to correct me if I missed it. Great, thank you.
So what I can say is, you mentioned the redlining cases, where we identify a civil rights violation, we bring a lawsuit, and we get a verdict in court or reach a settlement. I think Susan mentioned our loan subsidy fund in the Lakeland Bank case. Some of the settlement money does go to financial literacy programs to educate consumers about what types of financial literacy programs are available to them to understand the home mortgage loans and purchasing properties within the particular area. But what we need first is a violation of the federal civil rights laws before we can, in terms of what we do in enforcement, direct any funds to financial literacy programs. And these are funds that, through the consent orders that are required by the bank to go to fund these financial literacy programs and community partnerships.
Thank you. We have one last question. We only have, fortunately, we only have time for one last question. I don't know why I didn't do this all night. Feels so much better. How are you addressing sadistic terrorism, for example, inciting others to violence, crime, and hate crimes through the internet, rallies, etc.?
So the federal hate crimes statutes cover threats made to individuals and people conspiring to threaten individuals. So if it meets the standard of what a threat is, then we can prosecute them federally if they conspire to threaten somebody, if they conspire to commit violence. There is a First Amendment right to say some terrible things, so the threshold is if a person actually engages in a threat, what we call a true threat.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I want to invite...
I want to thank again our facilitators from CRS, who was Linda Ortiz and Matthew Lattimore. Thank you for handling the questions this evening. And with that, I will turn it over one more time to our U.S. Attorney, Phillip Selinger.
Let me just thank all of you once again for coming out tonight and taking this much time out of your lives to spend the evening with us. We understand that all of you have other things to do and families, but as we began, we've all said, our mission, our job is to represent you. And dialogues such as this, where we hear your concerns, hear your questions, are very helpful. We hope this has been helpful for you. You've got our brochures, so you've got contact information. If there are other questions, please follow up with us. And thank you again, and travel safely.
Just wanted to know that we have one of our council people, local council people who are with us tonight. I don't know if you wanted to say hello. You may be saying hello now. You heard that? I just said I wanted to know that we have one of our councilmen here with us. I don't know if you wanted to say hello.
I just want to thank the U.S. Attorney General's office because this is a very important seminar, especially with the climate in Jersey City. It's a lot going on. So I do want to thank you for coming here and handing out this literature so people at least know starting points. If you can't handle a case, at least you'll be able to direct them where they need to go. So I just want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
If you're interested in follow-up, please sign your name and provide the information, information, contact information right in front of the whiteboards. There's a signing sheet for follow-up.